Question 1. Process analysis reveals that Cow is preparing to launch a new product with significant marketing potential. During the internal review of marketing materials, a junior team member raises concerns that some of the performance claims, while based on initial promising test results, have not yet been fully validated by independent third-party testing. The marketing department is eager to proceed with the launch to capitalize on a timely market opportunity, suggesting that the claims can be qualified with a disclaimer. What is the most ethically and professionally responsible course of action for Cow in this situation? Option A. Release the marketing materials with the unverified claims, assuming that the positive initial results will be sufficient and any potential inaccuracies will be addressed if they arise. Option B. Proceed with the marketing campaign, but selectively highlight only the most positive initial test results and omit any data that might suggest limitations. Option C. Proceed with the marketing campaign, ensuring all claims are qualified with a clear disclaimer stating that results are preliminary and subject to further verification. Option D. Delay the marketing campaign until all performance claims have been fully validated by independent third-party testing, even if this means missing the optimal market window. Correct answer is C. Proceed with the marketing campaign, ensuring all claims are qualified with a clear disclaimer stating that results are preliminary and subject to further verification. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive publicity and the ethical obligation to ensure accuracy and avoid misleading stakeholders. The pressure to release information quickly for a marketing campaign can create a temptation to overlook potential inaccuracies or present information in a way that exaggerates positive outcomes. Careful judgment is required to balance business objectives with regulatory compliance and ethical conduct. The correct approach involves prioritizing factual accuracy and transparency above immediate marketing gains. This means thoroughly verifying all claims before public release, even if it delays the campaign. This aligns with the principles of fair dealing and market conduct, which are fundamental to maintaining trust with consumers and investors. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of regulations that prohibit misleading advertising and require truthful representation of products and services. By ensuring all information is substantiated, Cow upholds its commitment to ethical business practices and avoids potential regulatory scrutiny or reputational damage. An incorrect approach that involves releasing preliminary or unverified data for marketing purposes would be professionally unacceptable. This failure would violate the ethical duty to be truthful and could contravene regulations designed to prevent deceptive practices. Such an action risks misleading consumers about the capabilities or benefits of Cow's products, potentially leading to dissatisfaction and loss of trust. Another incorrect approach, which is to selectively present data to highlight only positive aspects while omitting negative or neutral information, is also professionally unsound. This practice constitutes a form of misrepresentation, as it creates an incomplete and potentially biased picture. It undermines the principle of full disclosure and can lead stakeholders to make decisions based on flawed information, thereby breaching ethical standards and potentially violating consumer protection laws. A third incorrect approach, which is to proceed with the marketing campaign without addressing potential concerns raised by internal review, demonstrates a disregard for due diligence and ethical responsibility. This prioritizes short-term gains over long-term integrity and could expose Cow to significant legal and reputational risks. It signifies a failure to uphold the professional standard of acting with integrity and in the best interest of all stakeholders. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Identify the core ethical and regulatory considerations. 2. Assess the potential impact of different courses of action on all stakeholders. 3. Prioritize accuracy, transparency, and compliance with relevant laws and ethical codes. 4. Seek clarification or guidance from legal or compliance departments if uncertainties exist. 5. Document the decision-making process and the rationale behind the chosen course of action. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that a new marketing campaign for Cow Corporation's personal care products could significantly increase market share and revenue. However, the proposed campaign relies on collecting and analyzing extensive customer data, including sensitive personal information, to tailor advertisements. Which approach best ensures Cow Corporation's compliance with relevant regulatory frameworks and ethical standards? Option A. Implement the campaign with a strong emphasis on the cost-benefit advantages and rely on the marketing team's understanding of consumer preferences to guide data usage, with a general understanding that data collection is standard practice. Option B. Proceed with the campaign as planned, assuming that general data protection policies already in place will cover the new initiative and address any specific issues if they arise post-launch. Option C. Focus primarily on the projected revenue increase and market share gains, and only conduct a minimal review of data handling practices to ensure basic legal compliance, deferring detailed ethical considerations to a later stage. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify all applicable data privacy, consumer protection, and advertising regulations, and ensure the campaign design and data handling practices fully comply with these requirements before launch. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive impact assessment to identify all applicable data privacy, consumer protection, and advertising regulations, and ensure the campaign design and data handling practices fully comply with these requirements before launch. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing potential business benefits with stringent regulatory compliance and ethical considerations, particularly concerning data privacy and consumer protection. The Cow Corporation, like any entity operating within regulated markets, must navigate these complexities to avoid legal repercussions, reputational damage, and loss of consumer trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that any proposed initiative, even one with apparent cost savings, does not inadvertently violate established legal frameworks or ethical standards. The correct approach involves a thorough impact assessment that prioritizes regulatory adherence and consumer rights. This means proactively identifying all relevant laws and guidelines, such as those pertaining to data protection, e.g., GDPR if operating in the EU, or relevant national data privacy acts, consumer advertising standards, and fair trading practices. The assessment should then evaluate how the proposed initiative aligns with or potentially conflicts with these regulations. If conflicts arise, the focus must be on modifying the initiative to ensure compliance or, if that's not feasible, recommending against it. This approach upholds the principle of lawful operation and ethical business conduct, which are paramount in maintaining stakeholder confidence and long-term sustainability. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the initiative based solely on the projected cost savings, without a comprehensive review of its regulatory implications. This could lead to violations of data privacy laws, resulting in significant fines and legal action. Another incorrect approach is to assume that existing general compliance measures are sufficient without a specific assessment for the new initiative. This overlooks the nuanced requirements of different regulations and the potential for unintended consequences. Furthermore, prioritizing short-term financial gains over long-term ethical standing and regulatory integrity is a failure in professional judgment, as it can erode trust and lead to more substantial costs in the future through penalties and reputational damage. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the regulatory landscape applicable to Cow Corporation's operations. This framework should include a mandatory step for conducting a detailed impact assessment for any new initiative, focusing on legal, ethical, and consumer protection aspects. If the assessment reveals potential non-compliance, the next step is to explore mitigation strategies or alternative approaches that achieve the business objective without compromising regulatory adherence. If no compliant alternative exists, the responsible decision is to halt or significantly revise the initiative. Question 3. Quality control measures reveal a potential safety concern with a new Cow cosmetic product during late-stage development. The product team is under pressure to launch by the end of the quarter. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation while adhering to regulatory expectations? Option A. Delegate the assessment of the safety concern to the marketing team to gauge consumer tolerance for minor imperfections. Option B. Proceed with the launch as scheduled, assuming the concern is minor and can be addressed through post-market surveillance. Option C. Expedite the remaining testing phases to meet the launch deadline, with a plan to address any identified issues after the product is on the market. Option D. Immediately halt the launch and initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis of the safety concern, implementing necessary corrective actions before proceeding. The correct answer is D. Immediately halt the launch and initiate a comprehensive root cause analysis of the safety concern, implementing necessary corrective actions before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for timely product development and market entry with the imperative to uphold product safety and regulatory compliance. A hasty approach could lead to significant reputational damage, financial penalties, and harm to consumers, all of which are critical considerations for a company like Cow. The correct approach involves a thorough and systematic risk assessment process. This means identifying potential hazards associated with the new product, evaluating the likelihood and severity of associated risks, and implementing appropriate control measures to mitigate these risks to an acceptable level. This aligns with the fundamental principles of product stewardship and regulatory compliance, ensuring that Cow's products meet all safety standards before reaching the market. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing consumer product safety, mandate such proactive risk management. An incorrect approach that prioritizes speed over safety would fail to adequately identify and address potential risks. This could lead to the introduction of a product with unforeseen defects or hazards, resulting in product recalls, consumer complaints, and potential legal liabilities. Such an approach would also contravene ethical obligations to consumers and disregard the spirit, if not the letter, of regulatory requirements designed to protect public health and safety. Another incorrect approach might involve relying solely on historical data without considering the unique characteristics of the new product. While past performance can be informative, it may not fully capture the novel risks associated with new formulations, manufacturing processes, or intended uses. This oversight could lead to a false sense of security and the overlooking of critical safety concerns. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a structured risk management framework. This includes 1. Hazard identification, 2. Risk analysis, 3. Risk evaluation, 4. Risk treatment, and 5. Monitoring and review. Stakeholders, including R&D, manufacturing, quality assurance, and legal/compliance teams, should collaborate to ensure all aspects of risk are considered and managed effectively. Question 4. Upon reviewing the current client onboarding process at Cow, a team member suggests a significant overhaul to improve efficiency. This overhaul involves digitizing several paper-based forms and automating data entry into the client relationship management system. While the proposed changes promise faster processing times, there is concern about ensuring that all data privacy and client verification requirements mandated by the relevant regulatory framework are maintained throughout the new digital workflow. Which of the following approaches best balances efficiency gains with strict adherence to regulatory compliance for Cow? Option A. Immediately implement the proposed digitization and automation changes to capitalize on the anticipated efficiency gains, assuming that standard data handling practices will inherently meet regulatory standards. Option B. Proceed with the digitization and automation of forms, focusing primarily on the speed of data entry, and address any potential regulatory concerns only if they arise during post-implementation audits. Option C. Implement the changes incrementally, digitizing one form at a time and automating data entry for each form sequentially, without a formal risk assessment or pilot testing for each individual change. Option D. Conduct a thorough review of the existing onboarding process, identifying specific points of inefficiency. Develop proposed digital solutions. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of these solutions against all applicable regulatory requirements, and implement a pilot program to test the new workflow before full rollout. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough review of the existing onboarding process, identifying specific points of inefficiency. Develop proposed digital solutions. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment of these solutions against all applicable regulatory requirements, and implement a pilot program to test the new workflow before full rollout. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because Cow, as a regulated entity, must ensure its internal processes align with the specific regulatory framework governing its operations. The challenge lies in identifying the most effective and compliant method for optimizing a process that impacts client interactions and data handling, without introducing new risks or violating established guidelines. Careful judgment is required to balance efficiency gains with adherence to regulatory mandates. The correct approach involves a systematic review and documentation of the existing process, followed by the identification of bottlenecks and inefficiencies. This is then coupled with the development of proposed changes, a thorough risk assessment of these changes against the relevant regulatory framework, and a pilot testing phase before full implementation. This approach is professionally sound because it prioritizes compliance and risk mitigation. Specifically, it aligns with the principles of good governance and operational integrity expected of regulated firms. By documenting each step, CAO can demonstrate to regulators that process changes were made thoughtfully and with due consideration for all applicable laws and guidelines. The risk assessment ensures that no regulatory breaches occur, and pilot testing allows for the identification and correction of unforeseen issues before they impact clients or lead to noncompliance. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on implementing changes based on anecdotal evidence or peer recommendations without a formal review and risk assessment would be professionally unacceptable. This failure stems from a disregard for the due diligence required by regulatory bodies. Such an approach risks introducing new compliance gaps or exacerbating existing ones, potentially leading to regulatory sanctions, reputational damage, and financial penalties. Another incorrect approach, which involves making significant changes without any form of testing or validation, is also professionally unsound. This bypasses critical steps in ensuring process integrity and regulatory adherence, leaving CAO vulnerable to operational failures and noncompliance. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process when optimizing processes within a regulated environment. This involves 1. Understanding the current process and its regulatory context. 2. Identifying potential areas for improvement. 3. Evaluating proposed changes against regulatory requirements and potential risks. 4. Developing a plan for implementation that includes testing and monitoring. 5. Documenting all steps and decisions for auditability and compliance. Question 5. System analysis indicates that a key client of CAO, with whom the company has a long-standing relationship, has requested access to preliminary, non-public market research data that CAO is currently compiling for an upcoming product launch. The client believes this data would significantly aid their strategic planning. The CAO employee responsible for managing this client relationship is aware that sharing this information would violate CAO's internal policies on data confidentiality and could potentially contravene regulatory guidelines regarding the dissemination of material non-public information. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CAO employee in this situation? Option A. Provide the client with a summary of the data, omitting any specific figures or sensitive details to assist their planning. Option B. Politely decline the client's request, explaining that the information is confidential and cannot be shared due to company policy and regulatory restrictions. Option C. Agree to share the data, but only after the official product launch announcement has been made to the public. Option D. Inform the client that while the data cannot be shared directly, the employee can offer general insights based on their understanding of the market trends. The correct answer is B. Politely decline the client's request, explaining that the information is confidential and cannot be shared due to company policy and regulatory restrictions. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a CAO employee due to the inherent conflict between a client's request and the company's established ethical guidelines and regulatory obligations. The core difficulty lies in balancing client satisfaction with the imperative to uphold integrity and comply with relevant laws, particularly concerning the disclosure of non-public information. Careful judgment is required to navigate this situation without compromising CAO's reputation or exposing the company to legal repercussions. The correct approach involves politely but firmly declining the client's request, explaining that such information cannot be shared due to confidentiality agreements and regulatory restrictions. This upholds best professional practice by prioritizing ethical conduct and adherence to the CAO hiring assessment tests implied regulatory framework, which would undoubtedly include principles of data privacy and non-disclosure of sensitive information. This approach demonstrates integrity, builds trust through transparency about limitations, and protects CAO from potential breaches of confidentiality or insider trading regulations. An incorrect approach would be to provide the client with the requested information, even if it seems harmless or is presented as a minor detail. This action directly violates confidentiality obligations and could be construed as a breach of trust, potentially leading to legal penalties for CAO and disciplinary action for the employee. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to circumvent the rules by providing the information indirectly or in a disguised format. This demonstrates a lack of integrity and a willingness to engage in unethical practices, which is unacceptable under any professional regulatory framework. Finally, ignoring the request or delaying a response indefinitely is also professionally unsound, as it fails to address the client's query and can lead to misunderstandings or a perception of incompetence. Professionals facing similar situations should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core ethical and regulatory principles at play. This involves understanding the company's policies, relevant laws, and the potential consequences of any action. The next step is to assess the client's request against these principles. If a conflict arises, the professional should prioritize adherence to ethical and regulatory standards. Communication is key. A clear, polite, and firm refusal, accompanied by an explanation of the limitations, is crucial. If unsure, seeking guidance from a supervisor or legal/compliance department is always the most prudent course of action. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that a new competitor has entered the market for a key consumer product category in which Cow Corporation holds a significant market share. This competitor is offering a similar product at a substantially lower price point, potentially impacting Cow's sales volume. As a Cow brand manager, you are tasked with developing a strategic response. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional ethical standards and regulatory expectations for fair competition? Option A. Conduct a thorough analysis of the competitor's cost structure, market positioning, and the potential long-term impact of various pricing and promotional strategies on the overall market, while ensuring compliance with all applicable competition laws and ethical guidelines. Option B. Immediately implement a significant price reduction on Cow's products to match or undercut the competitor's pricing, and launch an aggressive marketing campaign highlighting Cow's established brand reputation. Option C. Initiate a public relations campaign to question the quality and safety of the competitor's lower-priced product, without concrete evidence, to deter consumers from purchasing it. Option D. Focus solely on increasing production volume and reducing internal costs to maintain current pricing, assuming the market will naturally favor Cow's established brand over the new entrant. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement a significant price reduction on Cow's products to match or undercut the competitor's pricing, and launch an aggressive marketing campaign highlighting Cow's established brand reputation. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's desire for growth and market penetration with the ethical and regulatory obligations to ensure fair competition and prevent anti-competitive practices. The Cow Hiring Assessment Test, like many professional assessments, aims to evaluate a candidate's ability to navigate such complex situations by applying established principles and frameworks. Careful judgment is required to avoid actions that could be perceived as predatory or harmful to the market ecosystem. The correct approach involves a thorough and objective assessment of the competitive landscape, focusing on understanding the underlying market dynamics and the potential impact of Cow's proposed actions. This approach prioritizes compliance with relevant competition laws and ethical business conduct by seeking to understand if the proposed strategy could lead to market distortion or harm to competitors. It involves a proactive and responsible stance, ensuring that business decisions are not only profitable, but also legally sound and ethically defensible. This aligns with the principles of fair competition, which are often enshrined in regulatory frameworks designed to protect consumers and foster a healthy market. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on aggressive market share acquisition without considering the competitive implications would be professionally unacceptable. This could lead to violations of competition law, such as engaging in predatory pricing or other anti-competitive practices that stifle innovation and harm smaller players. Another incorrect approach, which involves ignoring potential market impacts and proceeding with the strategy without due diligence, demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and in disregard for regulatory compliance. This could result in significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and a loss of trust from consumers and stakeholders. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a clear understanding of the objectives, followed by a comprehensive assessment of potential risks and impacts, including legal, ethical, and market considerations. This framework should involve consulting relevant regulations and seeking expert advice when necessary. The process should prioritize transparency, fairness, and long-term sustainability over short-term gains achieved through questionable means. Question 7. Examination of the data shows that a cow procurement manager has a long-standing close personal friendship with an individual who is a key decision maker at a significant supplier company. The procurement manager is responsible for negotiating contracts and overseeing the performance of this supplier. The manager has not disclosed this relationship to cow. What is the most appropriate course of action for the cow procurement manager in this situation? Option A. Inform a trusted colleague within cow about the friendship and ask for their informal advice on how to proceed without formally reporting it. Option B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to cow's compliance department and their direct manager, and recuse themselves from any decision-making processes involving the supplier. Option C. Continue to manage the supplier relationship as usual, relying on their professional integrity to ensure fair dealings and objective decision-making. Option D. Discreetly ask their friend at the supplier company to offer cow slightly better terms than they offer other clients, believing this would benefit cow. The correct answer is B. Immediately disclose the personal relationship to cow's compliance department and their direct manager, and recuse themselves from any decision-making processes involving the supplier. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a cow employee due to the potential conflict between a personal relationship and the company's ethical obligations. Maintaining objectivity and avoiding even the appearance of impropriety is paramount in upholding cow's reputation and ensuring fair business practices. The core of the challenge lies in navigating the delicate balance between personal connections and professional responsibilities, requiring a judgment call that prioritizes integrity and compliance. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent disclosure of the relationship to the appropriate cow management or compliance department. This action demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and allows cow to implement necessary safeguards, such as recusal from decision-making processes involving the supplier. This aligns with general principles of corporate governance and ethical codes that mandate the reporting of potential conflicts of interest to prevent undue influence or preferential treatment. By proactively disclosing, the employee upholds their duty of loyalty to cow and ensures that all business dealings remain fair and transparent, thereby mitigating risks of bribery, corruption, or unfair competition. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the business relationship without disclosure, assuming personal integrity is sufficient to prevent bias. This fails to acknowledge the regulatory and ethical imperative to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Such a failure could lead to accusations of favoritism, damage cow's reputation, and potentially violate internal policies or broader ethical guidelines that require disclosure of such relationships. Another incorrect approach would be to attempt to manage the conflict independently by subtly influencing the supplier to offer better terms to cow, believing this benefits the company. This is ethically unsound as it still involves leveraging a personal relationship for business advantage, creating an unfair playing field and potentially exposing cow to reputational damage if discovered. It also bypasses cow's established procedures for supplier management and negotiation, undermining internal controls. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the relationship or only disclose it to appear. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of the seriousness of conflict of interest policies. Disclosure must be made to a level of management or compliance function, empowered to act on the information and implement appropriate controls, ensuring that cow's interests are protected at all times. The professional decision-making process should involve a clear understanding of cow's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies. When a potential conflict arises, the immediate steps should be: 1. Identify the potential conflict. 2. Consult relevant company policies. 3. Disclose the conflict to the designated authority, e.g., manager, compliance officer. 4. Follow the guidance provided by the company to manage or mitigate the conflict, which may include recusal from decision-making. Question 8. Assessment of how a financial advisor at Cow Investments should respond when a long-term client, who has previously expressed a conservative investment philosophy, now insists on investing a significant portion of their portfolio in a highly speculative technology stock they read about, without providing specific reasons for the sudden shift in preference. Option A. recommend a small, token investment in the speculative stock to satisfy the client's request, while advising them to keep the majority of their portfolio in more conservative assets. Option B. Politely decline the client's request, stating that the investment is too risky given their previously stated conservative approach, without further discussion or exploration of the client's motivations. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of the client's current financial situation, investment objectives, and risk tolerance, and then discuss the suitability of the speculative stock, presenting alternative options if it is deemed inappropriate. Option D. Immediately proceed with the client's requested investment in the speculative stock, as the client's explicit instruction overrides previous discussions about their risk tolerance. The correct answer is D. Immediately proceed with the client's requested investment in the speculative stock, as the client's explicit instruction overrides previous discussions about their risk tolerance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a client's immediate desire for a specific investment product and the advisor's fiduciary duty to ensure suitability and act in the client's best interest, as mandated by regulatory frameworks governing financial advice. The advisor must navigate the client's expressed preference while upholding their obligation to conduct thorough due diligence and provide recommendations aligned with the client's risk tolerance, financial objectives, and overall circumstances. This requires careful judgment to balance client autonomy with regulatory compliance and ethical responsibility. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the client's financial situation, risk profile, and investment objectives before recommending any product, including the one the client has expressed interest in. This aligns with the core principles of suitability and fiduciary duty. Specifically, under the regulatory framework for financial advisors, assuming a jurisdiction like the U.S., governed by FINRA and SEC regulations, advisors are obligated to have a reasonable basis to believe that a recommended investment or strategy is suitable for the customer based on the customer's investment profile. This profile includes, but is not limited to, age, investment objectives, other investments, financial situation and needs, risk tolerance, and experience. Recommending a product without this due diligence, even if requested by the client, would violate these fundamental regulatory and ethical obligations. An incorrect approach would be to immediately proceed with the client's requested investment without further investigation. This fails to meet the suitability requirements, as it bypasses the necessary assessment of whether the product is appropriate for the client's specific circumstances. Ethically, it prioritizes the client's stated preference over their actual best interests, potentially exposing them to undue risk. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the client's request outright, without understanding the underlying reasons for their interest. The advisor has a duty to ensure suitability. A complete disregard for the client's expressed wishes can damage the client relationship and may overlook valid, albeit perhaps misunderstood, client motivations. This approach lacks the necessary client-centric communication and education that is crucial for effective financial advice. A third incorrect approach would be to present the requested product as the only viable option, even after conducting a suitability assessment that reveals it is not the most appropriate choice. This misrepresents the available options and fails to provide the client with a balanced perspective, undermining the advisor's role as an objective guide. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the client's request. Actively listen to and understand the client's stated preference and the reasons behind it. 2. Conduct thorough due diligence. Independently research and assess the requested product's features, risks, and potential returns. 3. Assess client suitability. Gather comprehensive information about the client's financial situation, objectives, risk tolerance, and experience. 4. Compare and contrast. Evaluate the suitability of the requested product against other potentially more appropriate options. 5. Educate and advise. Clearly communicate the findings of the suitability assessment to the client, explaining why a particular product is or is not suitable, and present alternative recommendations with clear justifications. 6. Document everything. Maintain detailed records of all client interactions, assessments, recommendations, and client decisions. Question 9. Which approach would be most appropriate for a cow employee who discovers that a close personal friend is a candidate in a hiring process where the employee has a role in the interview panel? Option A. Proceed with the interview and evaluation as normal, assuming personal objectivity can be maintained, and not disclose the relationship to avoid potential awkwardness. Option B. Disclose the personal relationship to the relevant COW HR or compliance department and recuse oneself from all aspects of the candidate's evaluation and decision-making process. Option C. Ignore the personal relationship and hope that it does not influence professional judgment or create any perception of impropriety. Option D. Attempt to subtly advocate for the friend's candidacy during internal discussions, framing it as professional support rather than personal bias. The correct answer is B. Disclose the personal relationship to the relevant COW HR or compliance department and recuse oneself from all aspects of the candidate's evaluation and decision-making process. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual at COW to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with internal policies and external regulations. The core difficulty lies in balancing personal relationships with professional responsibilities and maintaining the integrity of COW's hiring processes. Careful judgment is essential to avoid even the appearance of impropriety, which can damage trust and lead to regulatory scrutiny. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure of the personal relationship to the appropriate internal authority, such as HR or a compliance officer, and recusal from any decision-making process involving the candidate. This upholds professional ethics by prioritizing fairness and objectivity in hiring. It aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate integrity and prevent conflicts of interest in business dealings. By disclosing and recusing, the employee demonstrates a commitment to COW's values and regulatory compliance, safeguarding the company from potential accusations of favoritism or unfair practices. An incorrect approach of proceeding with the interview and evaluation without disclosure risks violating COW's internal conflict of interest policies and potentially broader regulatory expectations regarding fair employment practices. This could lead to a perception of bias, even if no actual bias occurred, undermining the credibility of the hiring process. Another incorrect approach of attempting to subtly influence the outcome in favor of the friend, even if not explicitly stated, is a severe ethical and regulatory breach. This constitutes a conflict of interest and a failure to act in the best interests of COW. Such actions can lead to disciplinary action, reputational damage for the company, and potential legal repercussions if it can be proven that the hiring decision was compromised. Finally, an incorrect approach of ignoring the situation and hoping it goes unnoticed is a dereliction of professional duty. It fails to address the inherent conflict and leaves COW vulnerable to ethical and regulatory violations. This passive stance does not mitigate risk and can be interpreted as complicity if an issue arises later. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of COW's code of conduct and conflict of interest policies. When a potential conflict arises, the first step is to identify it. The next is to consult relevant policies and seek guidance from HR or a compliance department. Transparency and proactive disclosure are paramount. If a personal relationship could influence professional judgment or create the appearance of impropriety, recusal from decision-making is the most responsible course of action. Question 10. Implementation of a new AI-powered candidate sourcing and screening tool at COW is proposed to significantly reduce time to hire. The tool claims to identify high-potential candidates based on a proprietary algorithm. What is the most responsible approach for COW's hiring team to take regarding this proposal? Option A. Deploy the AI tool across all stages of the hiring process to maximize efficiency gains, with a plan to address any compliance issues that may arise post-implementation. Option B. Implement the AI tool for initial candidate screening only, using human recruiters to make final hiring decisions, thereby mitigating potential AI bias. Option C. Conduct a thorough audit of the AI tool's algorithms to ensure they do not introduce bias and are compliant with fair employment and data privacy regulations before full implementation. Option D. Immediately integrate the AI tool into the hiring process to leverage its speed and efficiency benefits, assuming the vendor's claims of fairness are accurate. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough audit of the AI tool's algorithms to ensure they do not introduce bias and are compliant with fair employment and data privacy regulations before full implementation. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the company's desire for efficiency with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical conduct. The cow hiring assessment test, as a simulated professional environment, demands a nuanced understanding of how process optimization can impact compliance and fairness. Careful judgment is required to ensure that improvements do not inadvertently lead to discriminatory practices or breaches of data privacy regulations. The correct approach involves a systematic review of existing hiring processes to identify bottlenecks and inefficiencies, followed by the implementation of changes that are demonstrably fair, transparent, and compliant with all applicable regulations. This includes ensuring that any new technology or methodology used in the hiring process does not introduce bias, and that candidate data is handled securely and ethically. Regulatory frameworks, such as those governing fair employment practices and data protection, mandate that hiring decisions are based on merit and that all candidates are treated equitably. Ethical considerations further reinforce the need for transparency and respect for candidate privacy. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on speed without considering regulatory compliance risks significant ethical and legal repercussions. For instance, automating candidate screening without validating the algorithms for bias could lead to discriminatory outcomes, violating fair employment laws. Another incorrect approach might involve collecting excessive personal data from candidates under the guise of process optimization, which could breach data privacy regulations and erode candidate trust. Prioritizing cost reduction by cutting corners on essential compliance checks or candidate feedback mechanisms would also be an ethically unsound and potentially illegal practice. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant regulatory landscape. This should be followed by a risk assessment of any proposed process changes, identifying potential compliance gaps or ethical concerns. Solutions should be developed collaboratively, involving legal, HR, and operational teams to ensure all perspectives are considered. Finally, continuous monitoring and evaluation of implemented processes are crucial to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 11. Governance review demonstrates that a junior marketing associate at Cal has discovered a potential discrepancy in the labeling of a new product line that may not fully comply with consumer protection regulations. The associate is concerned that the labeling might be misleading regarding the product's efficacy. The immediate pressure is to launch the product to meet quarterly sales targets. What is the most appropriate course of action for the marketing manager to take? Option A. Immediately halt the product launch, inform the legal and compliance departments, and initiate a thorough review of the labeling to ensure full regulatory compliance before proceeding. Option B. Inform senior management of the potential issue and await their directive on how to proceed, prioritizing the sales targets. Option C. Instruct the associate to revise the labeling slightly to address the concern without formally reporting it, to avoid delaying the launch. Option D. Proceed with the product launch as scheduled to meet sales targets, and instruct the associate to gather more detailed evidence of non-compliance before raising it further. The correct answer is A. Immediately halt the product launch, inform the legal and compliance departments, and initiate a thorough review of the labeling to ensure full regulatory compliance before proceeding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The pressure to meet targets can create a temptation to overlook or downplay potential compliance issues. Careful judgment is required to ensure that short-term gains do not compromise the integrity of Cal's operations and its reputation. The correct approach involves prioritizing transparency and adherence to regulatory guidelines, even when it might lead to short-term financial setbacks. This demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and regulatory compliance, which are fundamental to sustainable business practices and maintaining stakeholder trust. Specifically, reporting the potential issue promptly and initiating an internal investigation aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory oversight. This proactive stance helps mitigate future risks and ensures that Cal operates within the bounds of the law and ethical standards. An incorrect approach of delaying the report to gather more information, while seemingly prudent, risks violating reporting timelines mandated by regulations and could be interpreted as an attempt to conceal or minimize the issue. This failure to act promptly can lead to more severe penalties and damage to Cal's reputation. Another incorrect approach, that of dismissing the concern without proper investigation, is a direct ethical failure. It disregards the potential impact on consumers and the company's legal obligations, demonstrating a lack of due diligence and a disregard for ethical responsibilities. Finally, an approach that focuses solely on the financial implications without considering the regulatory and ethical dimensions fails to acknowledge the broader responsibilities of a publicly traded company. This narrow focus can lead to decisions that are legally precarious and ethically unsound. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and its potential implications, both financial and non-financial. This should be followed by a thorough review of relevant regulatory requirements and internal policies. Seeking advice from legal and compliance departments is crucial. The decision should then be made based on a commitment to ethical principles, regulatory compliance, and the long-term sustainability of the organization, rather than solely on immediate financial pressures. Question 12. During the evaluation of potential investment opportunities in Cow Corporation, an analyst discovers that Cow is currently undergoing a significant regulatory investigation that could materially impact its future earnings. The company has issued a brief, generic statement acknowledging the investigation, but has not provided further details or an estimated timeline for resolution. The analyst is considering how to incorporate this information into their assessment. Which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles of fair disclosure and market integrity as expected in a cow hiring assessment test context? Option A. Assume the investigation is a minor procedural matter and focus solely on Cow's historical financial performance and current market position. Option B. Conclude that the lack of detailed public information indicates the investigation is not material and proceed with the investment assessment based on optimistic projections. Option C. Seek out and incorporate all available factual information regarding the investigation, including its potential scope and implications, into the investment assessment, and clearly disclose the uncertainty it creates. Option D. Rely on informal channels and rumors within the industry to gauge the severity of the investigation, as formal disclosures are often incomplete. Correct answer is A. Assume the investigation is a minor procedural matter and focus solely on Cow's historical financial performance and current market position. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for positive public perception and the ethical obligation to disclose material information accurately and without undue delay. The Cow hiring assessment test, in its regulatory framework, emphasizes transparency and fair dealing with all stakeholders, including potential investors and the public. Misrepresenting or selectively disclosing information, even with the intent of managing public image, can lead to regulatory scrutiny, loss of investor confidence, and reputational damage. The correct approach involves a proactive and transparent communication strategy. This means acknowledging the potential impact of the regulatory investigation on Cow's operations and financial performance, and providing factual updates as they become available, in accordance with disclosure requirements. This aligns with the principles of good corporate governance and regulatory compliance, ensuring that all stakeholders have access to material information in a timely manner, thereby preventing market manipulation and fostering trust. An incorrect approach would be to downplay the significance of the investigation or to delay disclosure until the outcome is certain. This could be interpreted as an attempt to mislead the market or to gain an unfair advantage by withholding crucial information. Such actions violate the spirit and letter of regulatory frameworks designed to ensure market integrity and investor protection. Another incorrect approach would be to focus solely on positive aspects of Cow's business, while omitting any mention of the ongoing investigation, creating a misleadingly optimistic picture. This selective disclosure is unethical and can lead to severe penalties. Professionals tasked with managing such situations should adopt a framework that prioritizes regulatory compliance, ethical conduct, and stakeholder communication. This involves consulting with legal and compliance teams, assessing the materiality of the information, and developing a communication plan that is both accurate and timely, adhering strictly to the disclosure obligations mandated by the relevant regulatory bodies. The focus should always be on providing a balanced and factual representation of the situation. Question 13. The risk matrix shows a potential opportunity for Cow to gain significant market insight by analyzing publicly available but sensitive personal data from a competitor's customer survey. While this data is not explicitly protected by a confidentiality agreement with the competitor, its nature raises privacy concerns. You are tasked with assessing this opportunity. Which of the following actions best reflects a responsible and compliant approach for Cow? Option A. Proceed with the analysis of the competitor's customer survey data, as it is publicly available and could provide a valuable competitive edge for Cow. Option B. Immediately cease any further investigation into the competitor's customer survey data and report the discovery of this sensitive information to Cow's legal and compliance departments for guidance. Option C. Analyze the data discreetly and only use aggregated, anonymized insights to avoid any direct attribution to individuals or the competitor. Option D. Inform the competitor directly about the discovery of their customer survey data and offer to share Cow's own market research in exchange. The correct answer is A. Proceed with the analysis of the competitor's customer survey data, as it is publicly available and could provide a valuable competitive edge for Cow. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical obligations and regulatory compliance. The Cow hiring assessment test, like many professional assessments, aims to evaluate a candidate's ability to navigate such complex situations where personal gain might conflict with professional integrity and legal requirements. The core of the challenge lies in recognizing that, while the information might seem innocuous and beneficial to Cow in the short term, its acquisition and use could violate data privacy regulations and ethical standards. The correct approach involves prioritizing regulatory compliance and ethical conduct over potential short-term business advantage. This means immediately ceasing any further collection of the sensitive data and reporting the discovery through the appropriate internal channels, such as the compliance or legal department. This action aligns with the principles of data protection and privacy, which are paramount in maintaining customer trust and avoiding legal repercussions. Specifically, it adheres to the spirit of regulations that mandate responsible data handling and prohibit the unauthorized collection or use of personal information. By reporting the issue, the individual initiates a process to rectify the situation, ensuring Cow operates within legal and ethical boundaries. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with collecting or utilizing the sensitive data, even if it appears to offer a competitive advantage. This action would represent a direct violation of data privacy laws and ethical codes of conduct. It demonstrates a disregard for individual privacy rights and could expose Cow to significant legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the discovery and take no action. This inaction is also a failure, as it allows a potentially illegal and unethical practice to continue unchecked, making the individual complicit in any subsequent violations. Furthermore, attempting to rationalize the collection by assuming it's for a good cause, without proper authorization or legal basis, is a dangerous ethical pitfall, as it bypasses established procedures and legal frameworks designed to protect individuals. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the ethical and regulatory implications of any action. This involves asking, does this action comply with all applicable laws and regulations? And does this action align with our company's ethical code and professional standards? If there is any doubt, the next step is to seek guidance from the relevant internal departments, e.g., legal, compliance, HR, or external experts. Transparency and adherence to established protocols are crucial in maintaining professional integrity and safeguarding the organization. Question 14. Performance analysis shows a significant deviation in the completion rates of a key compliance training module across several departments within Cow. While some departments are exceeding expectations, others are showing considerably lower completion rates, with a few individuals in these underperforming departments having not started the module at all. What is the most appropriate next step for the compliance officer to take? Option A. Overlook the performance data, attributing the variations to normal operational fluctuations, and focus on other immediate compliance priorities. Option B. Immediately escalate the issue to senior management for disciplinary action against the underperforming departments and individuals. Option C. Assume that the low completion rates are due to a lack of employee engagement and implement a mandatory, company-wide retraining session on the importance of compliance. Option D. Initiate a targeted review to understand the reasons behind the low completion rates, including potential barriers to access or understanding, and engage with department heads to develop a supportive action plan. The correct answer is B. Immediately escalate the issue to senior management for disciplinary action against the underperforming departments and individuals. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk identification with the potential for overreaction or misinterpretation of data. The COW hiring assessment test, like many professional assessments, aims to evaluate a candidate's ability to apply regulatory principles in practical situations. A candidate's response will reveal their understanding of risk assessment methodologies and their adherence to ethical and regulatory standards within the context of a financial services firm. Careful judgment is required to distinguish between genuine risks and noise in the data, ensuring that actions taken are proportionate and compliant. The correct approach involves a systematic and evidence-based evaluation of the identified performance anomalies. This means not jumping to conclusions, but rather initiating a structured review process. This process should involve gathering further information, consulting relevant internal policies and procedures, and potentially engaging with the individuals or teams involved to understand the context behind the performance data. This methodical approach aligns with regulatory expectations for robust risk management frameworks, which mandate thorough investigation before implementing corrective actions. Ethically, it ensures fairness and due process for employees, preventing arbitrary disciplinary measures. An incorrect approach that immediately assumes misconduct or negligence without further investigation fails to uphold the principles of natural justice and due diligence. This could lead to unfair accusations, damage to employee morale, and potential legal repercussions for COW. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore the performance anomalies altogether, represents a failure in risk oversight and compliance. Regulators expect firms to have systems in place to monitor performance and identify potential risks, including those related to conduct, operational efficiency, or compliance breaches. Ignoring such signals could result in regulatory sanctions and reputational damage. A third incorrect approach, which is to implement broad, punitive measures without understanding the root cause, is both ineffective and unethical. It fails to address the actual problem and can create new risks by demoralizing the workforce. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven analysis, adherence to established policies, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Acknowledging the signal from the performance analysis. 2. Initiating a fact-finding mission to gather more context and evidence. 3. Consulting relevant internal policies and regulatory guidelines. 4. Engaging with stakeholders to understand contributing factors. 5. Developing proportionate and evidence-based actions. 6. Documenting the entire process and rationale for decisions. This structured approach ensures that decisions are not only compliant but also fair and effective in managing risks. Question 15. Compliance review shows that COW's internal client reporting system has been generating data that appears to be consistently understated compared to the source transaction records for the past quarter. While the discrepancy is not yet material enough to trigger automatic alerts within the system, a senior compliance officer has flagged it as a potential issue requiring immediate attention. What is the most appropriate course of action for COW to take in this situation? Option A. Inform the IT department to fix the system's data aggregation logic, but refrain from any external reporting or investigation until a significant material error is confirmed. Option B. Continue to monitor the discrepancy for the next reporting period, assuming it will self-correct or remain below the materiality threshold for regulatory reporting. Option C. Manually adjust the reported figures for the past quarter to align with the source transaction records before the next reporting cycle, without formally investigating the system's underlying logic or notifying any external parties. Option D. Immediately initiate a comprehensive investigation into the reporting system's data aggregation logic, identify the root cause of the understatement, and if necessary, report the findings and any corrective actions taken to the relevant regulatory authority as per established disclosure protocols. Correct answer is D. Immediately initiate a comprehensive investigation into the reporting system's data aggregation logic, identify the root cause of the understatement, and, if necessary, report the findings and any corrective actions taken to the relevant regulatory authority as per established disclosure protocols. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's operational needs with strict adherence to regulatory requirements concerning client data handling and reporting. The potential for reputational damage and regulatory penalties is significant if data is not managed and disclosed appropriately. Careful judgment is needed to ensure all legal and ethical obligations are met without compromising business efficiency unnecessarily. The correct approach involves proactively identifying and rectifying the discrepancy in the client reporting system by initiating a thorough investigation and implementing corrective actions, including timely notification to the relevant regulatory body as mandated by law. This demonstrates a commitment to transparency, accountability, and regulatory compliance. Specifically, under the regulatory framework for this exam, which focuses on data protection and financial reporting standards, failing to report material discrepancies promptly can lead to severe sanctions. The principle of duty of care and integrity in professional conduct also mandates such proactive disclosure. An incorrect approach would be to attempt to manually adjust the reported figures without a formal investigation or disclosure. This bypasses established control procedures and could be construed as an attempt to conceal the error, violating principles of accuracy and honesty in financial reporting and data integrity. It also fails to address the root cause of the discrepancy, leaving the system vulnerable to future errors. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the discrepancy, assuming it is minor and unlikely to be detected. This is a direct violation of regulatory obligations to maintain accurate records and report all material information. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for compliance, which can have severe consequences if discovered during an audit or by the regulatory authority. A further incorrect approach would be to only correct the system internally without informing the regulatory body. While internal correction is necessary, regulatory notification is often a mandatory step for certain types of reporting errors, especially if they could impact client understanding or regulatory oversight. Failure to notify when required constitutes a breach of reporting obligations. The professional decision-making process should involve 1. Recognizing the potential regulatory and ethical implications of the observed discrepancy. 2. Consulting the relevant internal policies and external regulations to understand reporting obligations. 3. Initiating a formal investigation to determine the cause and extent of the error. 4. Implementing corrective actions to rectify the system and the reported data. 5. Disclosing the issue to the relevant regulatory body as required by law and company policy. 6. Documenting all steps taken for audit and compliance purposes. Question 16. The performance metrics show a significant disparity in the achievement rates of certain sales targets between different demographic groups within COW's sales force. As a hiring assessment candidate, what is the most appropriate risk assessment approach to address this situation? Option A. Immediately implement additional training programs for the underperforming demographic groups to bring their performance up to the level of the higher-performing groups. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the performance metrics to identify any inherent biases or systemic issues that may be contributing to the disparity, and propose adjustments to ensure fairness and compliance with employment regulations. Option C. Focus on the overall team performance and aggregate sales figures, assuming that individual disparities will naturally correct over time. Option D. Reevaluate the sales targets themselves, considering whether they are realistic and achievable for all employees, regardless of demographic background. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the performance metrics to identify any inherent biases or systemic issues that may be contributing to the disparity, and propose adjustments to ensure fairness and compliance with employment regulations. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the need to achieve business objectives with the imperative to adhere to regulatory requirements and ethical standards. The COW hiring assessment test, as a simulated professional environment, demands that candidates demonstrate an understanding of how to identify and mitigate risks associated with performance management, particularly when metrics might inadvertently lead to discriminatory practices. Careful judgment is required to ensure that performance evaluations are fair, objective, and compliant with relevant employment laws and ethical guidelines. The correct approach involves proactively identifying potential biases in performance metrics and implementing safeguards to ensure fairness and compliance. This approach is professionally sound because it aligns with the principles of responsible business conduct and regulatory oversight. Specifically, it demonstrates a commitment to diversity and inclusion, which are often implicitly or explicitly mandated by employment regulations designed to prevent discrimination. By focusing on objective, job-related criteria and providing mechanisms for review and appeal, this approach mitigates the risk of unfair outcomes and potential legal challenges. An incorrect approach that relies solely on historical performance data without critical evaluation risks perpetuating existing biases. This is ethically problematic as it can lead to unfair disadvantages for certain groups and may violate anti-discrimination laws. Another incorrect approach that focuses on easily quantifiable metrics without considering qualitative aspects or potential external factors can lead to an incomplete and potentially misleading assessment of an individual's contribution, creating an environment where employees feel undervalued or unfairly judged. A third incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate performance improvements over long-term development and fair evaluation can lead to a high-pressure environment that may disproportionately affect certain employee demographics and could be seen as a failure to provide equal opportunities for growth. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the regulatory landscape and ethical expectations relevant to performance management. This involves critically assessing proposed metrics for potential biases, considering the impact on diverse employee groups, and establishing clear, objective criteria for evaluation. Furthermore, it requires implementing robust review processes and providing avenues for feedback and redress to ensure fairness and compliance. Question 17. Benchmark analysis indicates that Kao Corporation is planning a significant pre-launch campaign for a new skincare product. The marketing team has proposed several bold claims regarding the product's ability to deliver revolutionary anti-aging results and unprecedented skin rejuvenation within a short time frame. These claims are based on preliminary internal research and anecdotal feedback from a small group of testers. The marketing team is eager to generate maximum buzz and secure early sales by highlighting these perceived benefits prominently in all pre-launch materials. What is the most appropriate course of action for Kao Corporation to ensure compliance with regulatory frameworks and ethical marketing practices? Option A. Prioritize the marketing team's desire to create significant buzz by using the proposed claims, with the understanding that any necessary adjustments to claims can be made post-launch if regulatory concerns arise. Option B. Utilize the proposed claims but include a disclaimer stating that results may vary and are not guaranteed, which is a common practice to mitigate liability. Option C. Proceed with the proposed claims, as pre-launch marketing is often allowed some latitude for aspirational language, and the internal research provides a basis for the claims. Option D. Revise all marketing materials to remove subjective and aspirational language, focusing only on factual, scientifically substantiated claims that have undergone rigorous independent validation and regulatory review. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the proposed claims, as pre-launch marketing is often allowed some latitude for aspirational language, and the internal research provides a basis for the claims. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a company's desire for rapid market penetration and the stringent regulatory requirements designed to protect consumers and market integrity. Kao Corporation, as a publicly listed entity, is subject to specific disclosure obligations and ethical standards that govern its communications and product launches. The challenge lies in balancing the need to generate excitement and secure early adopters with the absolute necessity of adhering to the regulatory framework, which often mandates factual accuracy, substantiation of claims, and avoidance of misleading statements. Careful judgment is required to ensure that promotional activities do not inadvertently breach these regulations, leading to reputational damage, financial penalties, or legal action. The correct approach involves a meticulous review process that prioritizes regulatory compliance and factual accuracy above all else. This means ensuring that all marketing materials, including those used in pre-launch campaigns, are thoroughly vetted by legal and compliance teams. Claims made about product efficacy or benefits must be supported by robust, verifiable data that meets the standards set by the relevant regulatory bodies. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the principles of responsible corporate conduct and the legal obligations of Kao Corporation. It demonstrates a commitment to transparency and consumer protection, which are foundational to maintaining trust and a strong brand reputation within the regulated market. Adherence to these principles is not merely a matter of avoiding penalties, but is an ethical imperative for any company operating in a regulated industry. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the pre-launch campaign without adequate substantiation for the advertised benefits. This could involve making broad or exaggerated claims about the product's performance or unique selling propositions without the necessary scientific or empirical evidence to back them up. Such an approach fails to meet the regulatory requirement for factual accuracy and can be considered misleading to consumers. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit critical information about potential side effects or limitations of the product in the pursuit of a more appealing marketing message. This constitutes a failure in transparency and can lead to consumer harm, violating ethical obligations and regulatory mandates concerning full disclosure. A third incorrect approach might be to rely solely on anecdotal evidence or testimonials without independent verification, as these are generally not considered sufficient regulatory proof for product claims. This overlooks the need for objective, verifiable data that regulators expect. Professionals tasked with such decisions should employ a structured decision-making framework. This framework should begin with a thorough understanding of the applicable regulatory landscape and internal company policies. Next, all proposed marketing claims and strategies should be critically assessed against these requirements, with a specific focus on substantiation and potential for misinterpretation. Engaging legal and compliance experts early and often is crucial. If there is any doubt about the compliance of a particular claim or tactic, it should be revised or abandoned. The ultimate decision should always prioritize adherence to regulations and ethical standards, even if it means a slower or less aggressive market entry. Question 18. The risk matrix shows a cluster of risks with high likelihood and moderate impact, alongside a few risks with moderate likelihood and high impact. For Cow's product development division, which approach best balances regulatory compliance and efficient resource allocation? Option A. Develop a tiered mitigation plan, addressing high likelihood/moderate impact risks with efficient controls and dedicating more resources to the moderate likelihood/high impact risks due to their potential severity. Option B. Allocate resources to address all risks falling within the top two quadrants of the matrix, irrespective of their specific likelihood-impact combination. Option C. Focus exclusively on mitigating the few risks identified as having moderate likelihood and high impact, as these represent the most severe potential outcomes. Option D. Prioritize developing mitigation strategies for all risks with high likelihood, regardless of their impact level. The correct answer is D. Prioritize developing mitigation strategies for all risks with high likelihood, regardless of their impact level. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for proactive risk management with the practical constraints of resource allocation and the potential for overregulation. Cow, as a global consumer goods company, operates under various regulatory frameworks that mandate risk assessment and mitigation. The challenge lies in interpreting the risk matrix effectively to prioritize actions that are both compliant and strategically sound, avoiding a purely reactive or overly cautious approach that could stifle innovation or lead to inefficient use of resources. The correct approach involves a nuanced interpretation of the risk matrix, focusing on risks that are both high likelihood and high impact, and then developing proportionate mitigation strategies. This aligns with regulatory expectations for robust risk management frameworks, which typically require a systematic process for identifying, assessing, and treating risks. Ethically, it demonstrates a commitment to responsible business practices by prioritizing potential harm to consumers, the environment, or the company's reputation. This approach ensures that Cow's resources are directed towards the most significant threats, fulfilling its duty of care and compliance obligations without unnecessary expenditure. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on the highest likelihood risks, regardless of impact, would be flawed. This could lead to expending significant resources on minor issues while neglecting potentially catastrophic but less frequent events. This fails to meet the comprehensive risk assessment requirements of most regulatory bodies, which emphasize both likelihood and severity. Another incorrect approach, which is to ignore risks with moderate likelihood and moderate impact, is also problematic. While these risks may not appear as critical as high risks, a pattern of unaddressed moderate risks can accumulate, leading to significant cumulative damage or reputational harm, and may fall short of the proactive risk management expected by regulators. Finally, an approach that prioritizes only those risks with the highest potential financial impact, without considering other forms of impact, e.g., reputational, environmental, or consumer safety, would be ethically and regulatorily deficient. Many regulations are designed to protect public interest beyond purely financial considerations, and a narrow focus on financial impact could lead to overlooking critical non-financial risks. Professionals should use a decision-making framework that involves 1. Understanding the specific regulatory requirements for risk assessment in all relevant jurisdictions where COW operates. 2. Systematically analyzing the risk matrix, considering both likelihood and impact across various categories: financial, operational, reputational, legal, ethical, environmental, safety. 3. Prioritizing risks based on a defined risk appetite, which should be informed by regulatory obligations and ethical considerations. 4. Developing and implementing proportionate mitigation strategies, including controls, insurance, or acceptance, with clear ownership and timelines. 5. Regularly reviewing and updating the risk assessment and mitigation plans to reflect changing circumstances and emerging risks. Question 19. Quality control measures reveal a pattern of customer complaints regarding a specific batch of cow's skincare product, suggesting a potential inconsistency in formulation. The internal quality assurance team has flagged this as a potential issue requiring further investigation, but definitive proof of a widespread defect or consumer harm is not yet established. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for COW's product management team? Option A. Issue a voluntary product recall for the entire product line to err on the side of caution and avoid any potential liability, even without confirmed widespread issues. Option B. Disregard the initial complaints as anecdotal and continue with normal production and distribution until a significant number of verified adverse reactions are reported. Option C. Immediately halt production of the affected batch. Initiate a comprehensive internal investigation into the reported inconsistencies, and consult with legal and regulatory affairs to prepare for potential reporting and consumer communication. Option D. Instruct the customer service team to respond to all complaints by stating that the product meets all quality standards and that the complaints are likely due to individual user sensitivity. Correct answer is C. Immediately halt production of the affected batch. Initiate a comprehensive internal investigation into the reported inconsistencies, and consult with legal and regulatory affairs to prepare for potential reporting and consumer communication. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the company's immediate financial interests with its long-term ethical and regulatory obligations. The discovery of a potential product defect, even if not yet confirmed as widespread, necessitates a prompt and responsible response. Failure to act decisively could lead to significant reputational damage, regulatory penalties, and harm to consumers, all of which would ultimately impact COW's financial stability and market position. The challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of action based on preliminary findings, without causing undue alarm or unnecessary disruption. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves initiating a thorough internal investigation to ascertain the scope and severity of the potential defect. This includes gathering all relevant data, consulting with technical and quality assurance teams, and assessing the potential risks to consumers. Simultaneously, it is crucial to prepare for potential regulatory reporting and consumer communication, even if the defect is not yet confirmed. This proactive stance demonstrates a commitment to product safety and regulatory compliance, aligning with COW's ethical responsibilities and fostering trust with stakeholders. This approach is justified by the principle of consumer protection and the regulatory requirement to report potential safety issues. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to dismiss the initial report without further investigation, assuming it is an isolated incident. This fails to acknowledge the potential for systemic issues and violates the ethical duty to prioritize consumer safety. It also risks contravening regulatory frameworks that mandate reporting of potential product defects. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately issue a public recall or warning without a comprehensive investigation. While appearing proactive, This could be premature and unnecessarily damage the brand's reputation and consumer confidence if the defect is minor or unconfirmed. It also risks misallocating resources and causing undue panic. A third incorrect approach would be to conceal the findings and attempt to address the issue internally without informing relevant stakeholders or regulatory bodies. This is a clear ethical and regulatory violation, potentially leading to severe penalties and loss of trust. It prioritizes short-term damage control over long-term integrity and compliance. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a situation should employ a structured decision-making process. First, gather all available information and assess the credibility of the initial report. Second, initiate a rapid but thorough internal investigation to confirm the nature and extent of the issue. Third, consult with legal and compliance departments to understand all regulatory obligations and potential liabilities. Fourth, develop a tiered response plan, starting with internal containment and investigation, and escalating to external communication and action as the investigation progresses and the risk becomes clearer. This process ensures that decisions are data-driven, ethically sound, and legally compliant, protecting both consumers and the company. Question 20. Investigation of cow hiring assessment test data handling procedures reveals a discrepancy where the company's internal policy for retaining candidate assessment data is shorter than the minimum retention period mandated by the applicable regulatory framework. What is the most appropriate course of action for cow to ensure regulatory compliance? Option A. Continue to follow cow's internal data retention policy, assuming it is sufficient for operational efficiency. Option B. Proceed with data deletion according to cow's internal policy and address any potential regulatory issues if they arise later. Option C. Attempt to interpret the regulatory framework in a manner that allows for the shorter retention period specified in cow's internal policy. Option D. Adhere to the minimum data retention period stipulated by the applicable regulatory framework, even if it requires retaining data for longer than cow's internal policy dictates. Correct answer is D. Adhere to the minimum data retention period stipulated by the applicable regulatory framework, even if it requires retaining data for longer than cow's internal policy dictates. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the potential conflict between a company's internal policies and external regulatory requirements, specifically concerning data privacy and client confidentiality. Navigating this requires a deep understanding of the applicable regulatory framework to ensure compliance and protect both the company and its clients from legal repercussions and reputational damage. The correct approach involves prioritizing the regulatory framework over internal company guidelines when a conflict arises that could lead to a breach of regulations. This is because regulatory requirements are legally binding and carry significant penalties for non-compliance. Adhering to the regulatory framework ensures that cow hiring assessment test is operating within the bounds of the law, safeguarding sensitive candidate data and maintaining trust. This approach demonstrates a commitment to ethical conduct and robust compliance, which are paramount in the hiring and assessment industry. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on cow's internal data retention policy, even if it is less stringent than regulatory requirements. This failure would constitute a direct violation of the specified regulatory framework, potentially leading to fines, sanctions, and damage to cow's reputation. Another incorrect approach would be to seek to interpret the regulatory framework in a way that aligns with the company's existing policy, without proper legal counsel or a thorough understanding of the regulatory intent. This can lead to misinterpretations and inadvertent noncompliance. Finally, ignoring the discrepancy and proceeding without clarification or adjustment would be a severe lapse in professional judgment and regulatory adherence, exposing cow to significant risks. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the conflict between internal policy and external regulations. This should be followed by a thorough review of the relevant regulatory requirements, seeking clarification from legal or compliance departments if necessary. The next step is to determine the most compliant course of action, which may involve updating internal policies to align with regulations or seeking specific guidance on how to handle the discrepancy. Transparency with stakeholders, where appropriate, and documenting the decision-making process are also crucial elements of professional conduct.